Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so much. She was left behind with her siblings and no name until a rancher gave her a last name and a new life, Dust River, Texas, 1873. The wagon creaked as it rolled down the red dust road, its wheels wobbling like they could give out at any moment. Inside sat two figures, slumped in whiskey and resentment, Caleb and Loretta Hanley, arguing loud enough to silence the wind. "You and these brats are nothing but dead weight," Caleb snarled, his voice cracked with liquor and years of blame. "You drag me straight into the mud every damn day." Loretta kept her back turned, pulling her frayed shawl tighter around her shoulders. She spoke over it, dry and distant, "I'd rather die than feed mouths that only open to wine and never to work." Behind them, stumbling in the dust, four children stood like shadows left too long in the sun. The youngest, a girl barely 3, ran forward on unsteady legs, grasping at her mother's skirt. "Mama, take me with you," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Loretta yanked her arm away like she'd touched something filthy. The child fell backward into the dirt. Eva stood silent, 19 years old, hands gripping the small shoulders of her younger siblings. Her face held no shock, no tears, just the hollow resignation of someone who had been abandoned so many times the wound had gone numb. The house behind them was already half gutted, sold off to cover gambling debts. The shutters swung loose, windows broken, the porch sagging like it mourned its own decay. They were not new to being left, but this time was final. A year ago, Eva could still feel the sting of her father's belt when he caught her giving half her dinner to her brother. She had fallen to her knees on the dirt floor, cheeks swelling with bruises, lips cracked from cold. Yet even then, she'd looked up at Loretta and dared to ask, "If you never meant to love us, why did you bring us into the world?" Caleb had not waited for Loretta's answer, he had backhanded Eva so hard she had flown sideways into the wall, coughing up blood and dust. "That was the mistake," he spat, his eyes rimmed red and wild. "The mistake was bringing a flock of useless mouths into this house." Loretta had stood at the corner then, watching. She had not lifted a hand, not a word, not even a breath for her daughter. Now, as the wagon rumbled away, Eva did not cry. Her arms tightened around the shoulders of her siblings, pulling them close as the light drained from the sky. The world had already shown her what it would take away. That night, under the collapsed awning of their former porch, Eva scraped together what she could find, wet branches, moldy scraps, and coaxed a fire into a weak flicker. It hissed like a dying animal, more smoke than flame, but it was something. It was hers. Her siblings huddled near, silent from hunger and fear. The youngest still sniffled for their mother. Eva said nothing, she pulled her shawl tighter, but the cold went deeper than the skin. It lived in her now. She had no money, no food, no home, and no name she wished to carry anymore. The fire burned down. She looked up at the vast Texas sky, bruised purple with night, and said aloud, not loud enough to wake the children but clear enough for the stars to hear, "That name is not mine anymore." She did not cry, not when the baby whimpered in her arms, not when her stomach twisted from hunger, not even when the wind cut through her like knives, because names meant belonging, and tonight she belonged to no one, only the fire, only the wind, and 4 small hands gripping her sleeves in the dark, depending on her to be something more than what her name had ever meant. The next morning, long after the wagon had vanished into the horizon, a lone rider paused on the edge of Dust River's outskirts. His boots tapped against the stirrups, dust clinging to the hem of his coat as he scanned the desolate yard. Calder Reed was not one for town gossip. He had no wife, no children, and no patience for card games or saloon talk. He worked cattle, mended fence lines, and rode out early to check on the land his father left him. But today, something in the air pulled his attention. He saw them, 5 figures huddled beneath a tattered porch, wrapped in threadbare blankets. One girl stood upright, older than the rest, thin arms spread protectively around the others. She stared at him, chin lifted, eyes like cracked stone, tired, yes, but unbroken. He tipped his hat. "You all right?" The girl didn't answer. He tried again, voice low, "You got a name?" She stared at him a moment longer, then said, "I have a first name, but I don't carry the rest anymore." Calder furrowed his brow. "And what name do you go by?" She looked down, then met his eyes again. "Just Eva." Something flickered in his chest at that, not pity, not even sympathy, just recognition, that kind of quiet fury that only comes from being torn away too many times. Calder said nothing more. He nudged his horse and rode off into the dust, leaving behind nothing but hoof prints and a glance that lingered longer than it should. That night, as darkness crept over the town again, Eva returned from foraging to find a bundle tucked beneath the broken gate, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, a few pieces of cured meat wrapped in oilcloth. She froze, looked around, no sign of anyone. The next morning, a pile of chopped firewood rested near the corner where her weak flame had struggled the night before, dry kindling, perfectly split, stacked with care. Still no one in sight. On the third day, a small tin can of beans, then a blanket, then a pouch of salt and sugar. Eva stayed watchful. At first, she thought it might be a trap, some cruel trick, but the food was never poisoned, the firewood never faulty, and most of all, no one came asking for thanks. One evening, she waited behind the ruined well as the sun bled over the prairie, and there he was, the same man, the one on horseback. He didn't approach, just left another bundle near the porch, checked the sky, and turned back toward the hills. She stepped out as he mounted. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice steady. He glanced at her. Over his shoulder, he said, "Because someone should." "That's not a reason," he smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but it's enough." She looked at him hard. "I told you I don't have a last name." He nodded once and didn't ask for one. Then he rode off, quiet as ever. From that day on, she stopped waiting behind corners. She accepted the help but never grew greedy. She rationed everything, made sure her siblings had more than she did, and left one coin, her only coin, wrapped in cloth near the well where he'd walked. He never took it. He never spoke much, and she never asked for more than he gave. But somehow, in that silence, trust began to grow. Not the fast-burning kind, but the slow, steady warmth of someone who never said, "You owe me," and never looked at her like she was a burden to carry. For Eva, that was more powerful than any rescue. And for Calder, he did not know it yet, but something in her voice had planted itself deep, a name abandoned, a girl who stood in the wreckage and refused to break. It was the first time in years he thought of carving out something more than a fence line. And maybe, just maybe, this girl without a last name had started to believe she was worth something again. The wind over Dust River carried a scent of saddle oil and sun-scorched grass as Eva trudged up the dirt path to Calder's ranch. Her boots were cracked, her palms blistered from splitting firewood, but she held her chin high, the parcel clutched in her arms, bread, salt, 2 blankets, every item he had left without a word. She knocked on the weathered post of the gate. Calder looked up from where he was nailing a rail back onto the corral. "You came," he said simply, brushing dust from his hands. "I came to return what's yours." He nodded once, not moving. Eva placed the bundle at his feet. "I'm not a charity case." Calder stared at it. "Neither am I." She blinked, not understanding. He straightened, looked at her, really looked. "You want to return it," he said, voice flat. "Fine, take it out and work." Eva's fingers curled. "Work? You know horses." "No," he tipped his hat back. "Good, you'll learn." And just like that, the line was drawn. Eva stayed. She swept the porch first, then the barn. She watered the animals, picked stones from the field with hands raw and shaking. At night, she boiled soup from bones and onion and scrubbed Calder's old pans until they shone like hammered silver. She never asked for help, he never offered. But he noticed how she stood, even when her knees wobbled, how she fed her youngest brother before she touched a spoon. The ranch grew quieter in a different way, not empty, but full of motion, soft breathing, laughter from the children when the wind was calm. One morning, Calder left a broad-brimmed hat on the porch rail. No note. Eva stared at it a long time, then put it on. A week later, a pair of second-hand boots by the barn door, then a worn but sturdy brush with carved ivory teeth. She never thanked him, he never expected her to. One evening, after a long day branding calves, they sat near the fire. Calder rubbed the tension from his neck. Eva ladled out stew, her fingers trembling only slightly from exhaustion. "You never ask my name," she said. He looked up. "You know it's Eva, but you never ask the rest." He stared into the fire for a long moment. The flames danced in his eyes like secrets held too long. "You ever been shot?" he asked. Eva blinked. "No." He nodded. "Hurts like hell, but it's the healing that really burns." She didn't speak. He added, "Sometimes the only way you get through is not looking at what hit you, just forward, step by step." A pause. "I figured asking your name was like touching a wound still bleeding." She looked down at her bowl. Then he said quietly, "Anyone who survives what you did deserves the right to choose what name they carry next." Eva turned her face slightly, her eyes shimmered in the firelight. No one had ever said that to her. She had expected him to press, to pry, to offer pity masked as curiosity, but he hadn't. And in that space he gave, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, safe. Not because he promised it, but because he never asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. The sun had not yet cleared the hills when Eva returned to the house she once called home, what remained of it anyway. The structure leaned as if exhausted, the roof sagging under time and silence. The front door swung wide, pushed by a restless wind. It creaked with each sway like an old man's knees. Eva paused on the path, her youngest sister asleep in her arms. Her brothers walked quietly behind her, dirt smudged across their cheeks, eyes dull from hunger and uncertainty. The house looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had grown too fast. She stepped under the porch, the board beneath her foot groaned. When she reached the door, it clattered on its hinges like it had been screaming for help all this time. It was more ruin than shelter, but it was all they had. Later that day, as she swept fallen leaves from the front room, a sound came from outside, hoofs against the dirt, slow and steady. She turned and saw Calder dismounting his horse, a length of rope and tools slung across his back. He said nothing. She opened her mouth to speak, to say she did not need him, that she had not asked, but the words caught somewhere between pride and gratitude. He walked past her, knelt at the door, and without a word began to repair the hinge. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching the way he moved, not rushed, not loud, just steady, like a man who did not care for empty talk when there was something broken to mend. "I didn't ask you to come," she said quietly. He did not look up. "Good. Makes it easier to come on my own." When the door was fixed, he tested it, opened it, closed it. It clicked gently into place, no longer banging in the wind. "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a grunt that might have meant, "You're welcome," and left without another word. The rain came that night. It rolled in heavy and sudden, battering the patched window. The wind howled through the trees. The roof leaked, and the wind slid under the cracks like fingers searching for weakness. Eva lay curled beside her siblings on the floor, too tired to move, too cold to find sleep. Her breath came in tight gasps, her skin burned. The fever had taken root quickly. Somewhere in the night, she drifted between dreams and darkness. She woke to the smell of something warm. Blinking against the faint candlelight, she saw a bowl and a wooden crate beside her, steam curling up from it. A wool blanket covered her legs, heavier and softer than anything she owned. Next to the bowl was a scrap of paper, folded once. She opened it with trembling fingers. "You are not alone." That was all it said, no name, no greeting, just those 4 words in a hand she recognized. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, sudden and hot. She had not cried in weeks, not when her father left, not when her mother pulled away from the youngest child, not when her body ached from hunger. But this undemanding kindness, broke something open. She sipped the broth slowly, it tasted like warmth, like safety, like someone had noticed. When morning came, she woke to the sun breaking through cloud and fog. The storm had passed, her fever had broken. Her hands, once trembling, now felt solid beneath her. Again, she sat at the table in the small front room. The paper still sat beside her. She turned it over, the pencil was there too. She picked it up, hands still pale from the fever, and pressed the tip to the paper. Eva, she wrote it with care, each letter slow, like she was meeting the word for the first time. Then she hesitated, her pencil hovering above the blank space that waited after the last name, the one her father gave her, the one her mother used when cursing her. She stared at it for a long time, then she placed the pencil down. That space would remain blank, at least for now. But for the first time, it did not feel like an absence, it felt like a choice. The days rolled by like dust across the plains, quiet, sun-bleached, and steady. Eva rose before the sun, chopped kindling with hands that no longer shook, and watched her siblings grow strong again. The bones in their cheeks began to disappear beneath returning flesh. Laughter found its way back into their voices. They spent most afternoons at Calder's ranch. He never said why they were welcome, he just left the barn doors open and a pot always simmering. He worked with the same silent precision as always, but the way he handed the youngest a carved wooden whistle or taught the middle boy to braid rope said more than words ever could. It was the little things, the way he shifted the saddle lower so the second youngest could mount alone, the way he mended a tear in Ava's shawl and left it on the porch without a note, and the way he taught them all softly, without pride. He showed them how to guide a horse without jerking the reins, how to listen to the wind when you got lost in the trees, how to judge a man not by the dust on his boots but by how he treated something smaller than himself. The youngest girl, Lily, adored him most of all. She followed Calder like a shadow. With braids, he did not seem to mind. One afternoon, a wagon creaked its way up the path toward Calder's home. A man in a worn black coat climbed down, holding a leather-bound book under his arm. He introduced himself as a preacher from Dust River's tiny chapel. "I was told there are new children living near the Boone place," he said. "Thought it might be time to register them with the church for school and Sunday service." Calder nodded, leaning against a fence post. Eva stood a few feet away, dust on her dress, arms crossed tight against the breeze. The preacher crouched before the children, smiling kindly. "And what are your names, little ones?" They answered one by one. Then came the question that hung like a blade. "What is your family name?" Eva opened her mouth, nothing came out. She looked down at the dirt, her hands clenched into fists. Before she could speak or break, Lily stepped forward. She lifted her chin and said, clear as creek water, "We are Boones." The preacher blinked. "Pardon?" Lily pointed her thumb at Calder. "That's our family now. Uncle Calder is our home, so our name is Boone." Silence. Eva could not breathe. Calder's eyes locked on Lily. He looked startled, like something in him cracked in half and mended at the same time. Then slowly, he turned and walked into the barn without a word. The preacher, flustered, mumbled something about checking back another time. He left. Eva stood there long after the wagon disappeared. That night, Calder did not eat with them, but when Eva walked into the barn later to return a borrowed blanket, she found something carved into the beam above the stable, Eva Boone. No questions, no pressure, but just a name, a gift. And for the first time, when she whispered it aloud, it felt like it belonged to her. It happened on a Tuesday beneath a sky heavy with storm. A wagon rolled up from the south, older than the town itself, pulled by a mule whose ribs jutted out like broken fence posts. Dust clung to its wheels. In the seat sat a man with a slanted hat, yellowed teeth, and eyes sharp as railroad nails. Behind him, a younger boy, maybe 15, maybe a shade cruel, wore a smirk that curled like smoke on a cold pan. Eva was tending to the porch steps, patching a cracked board when she saw the crest stitched into the man's coat pocket, a crude emblem of 3 antlers crossing her mother's side, kin by blood. Barely her body stiffened before her thoughts did. The man climbed down like he owned the dirt. His boots were cracked, his presence sour. "You must be Eva," he said, voice slick as grease. "Loretta's girl. We heard about what happened. Real shame. Thought we'd come fetch the little ones. Family should be with family after all." Before Eva could form a word, Calder stepped out from the barn. He moved slow, like a storm cloud creeping across flatland. His hat was pulled low, his shirt damp with work. He wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "Voic. They are not bags of grain to be carted off." The man gave a lazy shrug, not saying they are, just saying they got blood in them. Handily blood. We got a stretch of land and needing help. They'll work, eat better than being nobody. Eva's stomach twisted. Her youngest sister peeked through the doorway, clutching a rag doll. The twin stood behind her, still and wide-eyed. Calder took a step forward. "You do not get to vanish for years and reappear when it suits your fence line. This isn't about blood, it's about who stayed when it rained." The man's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to say? You got no papers, no marriage, no claim, just a name pulled out of dirt. What gives you the right?" Calder's jaw tightened, his voice dropped. "I'm the one who showed up." The air felt like it cracked for a beat. It seemed the man might reach for something in his coat, but then a door creaked. A neighbor stepped out, then another, and another. Silent figures appeared on porches, under awnings, at the edge of the general store. A woman from the bakery crossed her arms. "I saw that girl carry 3 kids through a flood. I saw this man bring firewood when no one else did." The blacksmith added, "They belong here. Boone isn't just a name, it's what we call the ones who care." The man's face curled like burned paper. "So you'd let a girl choose a stranger over her kin?" Eva stepped forward. Her boots clicked on the porch steps. She did not look at Calder, but her fingers found his hand. She laced them together tight as vows. "I choose him," she said, voice clear. "I choose the man who carried our future instead of cursing our past." The boy on the wagon spat in the dirt. "You're just a child," the man hissed. Eva didn't flinch. "I was a child when you left me bleeding on the kitchen floor. I was a child when you slapped my name out of my mouth. I'm not a child anymore, and I don't belong to you. I don't belong to pain." She turned to the onlookers. "My name is Eva Boone," she said, "and I chose it with my hands, with my heart, and I do not regret it." A soft hum of agreement rippled across the crowd. The man stared a second too long, then he turned, spit near Calder's boot, and climbed under the wagon. The mule groaned, and the wheels turned. The boy said nothing, they rode away into the dust they came from. Eva did not cry. Calder didn't speak, but that night, after the wind had died and the children were tucked in, she found a folded piece of paper on her windowsill. The handwriting was rough, a little unsure. "Calder," it read, "blood leaves but heart stays." The barn had once been nothing but splintered wood and shadows, used to house old feed and broken plows. But under Eva's hands and Calder's quiet labor, it became something else, something new. They cleared it out together, Calder lifting the heavy crates and Eva sweeping out years of dust with a ragged broom. She repurposed cracked chairs and stacked them into benches. A warped table became a desk. She borrowed slates from a widow in town and nailed old curtains across the drafty windows to catch the light just right. One afternoon Eva stood back and stared at what they had made. It was not perfect, not even close, but it was the first thing she had ever helped build that was meant to shelter dreams, not just bones. The first lesson she wrote on the old blackboard was just one word, etched in bold white chalk: name. She faced a room of children, not only her siblings but others from the edge of Dust River, kids who never belonged anywhere, who had been called by numbers or chores or not called at all. Some had never been in a school. One girl flinched when Eva raised her voice to call roll, but Eva kept teaching with patience carved from years of surviving and warmth shaped like second chances. She taught them to say their names with their backs straight and their chins high, to spell them out like declarations, to believe they mattered because they existed. At the end of that first week, Calder hung a new sign above the barn doors. He had carved the words himself in blocky, uneven letters that caught the sunlight in grooves: Boone School, a place where everyone has a name. When Eva saw it, she reached up and ran her fingers over the grooves as if they were a prayer. That night, the classroom sat empty again, the lantern burned low. Calder stayed behind to mend a broken bench, but Eva knew it was just an excuse to linger. He sat at the teacher's desk, fingering a worn ribbon from her sister's dress. Calder approached and placed something on the wood in front of her, something folded, plain official paper. She unfolded it carefully, as if it might vanish in her hands: a marriage application. The line for the bride's name was blank, but in Calder's sharp, deliberate hand, one sentence was written across the bottom: she can choose to carry my name, but I've carried her for a long time already. Eva did not speak. She looked up into eyes that had never once demanded anything from her, eyes that saw through every sharp word she had used as armor, every silence she had wielded as a shield. Calder stepped back. "You do not have to," he said, his voice gruff as always. "This place, it's yours whether you sign or not." Eva stood slowly, paper still in hand. She walked over to the chalkboard, erased the day's lesson, then with slow, deliberate strokes, she wrote 2 words: I choose. She turned back to him, her voice was clear, soft as firelight. "I do not carry shame anymore, just the name I chose and the one you gave room for." Calder came closer, gently took the chalk from her hand, and under her name, he drew a line, not a period, not a flourish, just a single steady mark. "Line for the rest of our story," he murmured. Eva reached for his calloused hand, and together they stood beneath the wooden sign, 2 people who had never been given much but had learned to build something from nothing. And outside, the night was quiet, but inside the barn, where a school had bloomed from ruins and 2 names now stood side by side on a chalkboard, a fire burned that no storm could put out. The river had never smelled sweeter than it did that spring morning, laced with wild lilac, campfire smoke, and the faint scent of cinnamon from the kitchen window at Boone Ranch. Neighbors came on foot, on horseback, in creaky wagons and Sunday clothes, not to a grand chapel, not to a saloon dance, but to the open land beside a barn that had once been broken, now transformed. A pine arch stood where cattle used to be tied. Wildflowers crowned its beams, lanterns hung from trees, and in the dirt, Eva's siblings had scattered petals from whatever they could gather: dandelions, clover, even prairie sage. Calder stood beneath the arch in his only clean shirt, sleeves rolled once at the cuffs. He had shaved that morning, not to look handsome, but to look like a man who could be trusted with a life beside hers. His hands were steady, his eyes waited only for her. When Eva stepped forward, holding her youngest sister on her hip, every sound seemed to hush: crickets, wagons, even the wind. She wore no veil, just a dress sewn by 3 women from the town and a braid tied with her mother's old ribbon, kept not for the woman but for the memory of surviving her. Her eyes met Calder's, and she smiled, not wide but sure. The preacher asked them the usual words, but Calder, never much for formality, raised a hand to pause. "I do not need someone who shares my blood," he said, loud enough for every ear to catch it. "I just need someone who brings fire home and keeps it burning." Gasps stirred, but no one laughed, because in Dust River, everyone knew what it meant to keep a fire alive through winter. Then Eva, still holding her sister, turned to face the small crowd: neighbors, outcasts, schoolchildren, cowhands who once thought her strange. She said, "A name is something you are born with, but it can be stripped, poisoned, forgotten." Her voice never cracked, not once. But a place in this world, that is something you live to earn, and today I choose mine. I carry the name Boone, not because I was born to it, but because someone made space for me in it. She looked at Calder again, her siblings gathered at her side like flowers drawn to warmth. The preacher said nothing else, he did not need to. He simply stepped back, and the two, man and woman, heart and hope, sealed their vow not with a kiss for show, but with joined hands and quiet eyes that said, "We are already home." Later that evening, the new sign was nailed above the ranch door, Eva Boone family. No blood, all heart. It was Calder's handwriting, carved deep into cedar. Beneath it, little muddy fingerprints marked where the children had pressed their hands in paint, yellow, blue, red, a new kind of coat of arms. Inside, the fire crackled. Calder knelt near it, coaxing it gently with pine and cedar. Behind him, laughter filled the kitchen. Eva and the children worked together, rolling dough, flour in their hair, sticky hands reaching for the sugar tin. The youngest one shrieked when dough landed in her lap. Eva bent over in laughter, wiping it away with the sleeve of her new dress. Calder looked over his shoulder just once, and when he did, the lines on his face softened, as if the years had not broken him but led him here to the fire, to the noise, to the home. He stoked the flame again, then left the poker leaning against the stone, knowing now he was no longer the only one who kept the light outside. The stars began to blink on above Dust River, but in the Boone house, the lights were already burning, and they were not going out anytime soon. If this story reached into your heart, if it reminded you that family is not always born but sometimes found and built, then you belong here with us. At Wild West Love Stories, we tell tales where names are earned, not given, where strength is quiet and love is the loudest truth in the dust. If you believe in second chances, in ranchers with rough hands and tender hearts, and in girls who choose their own names, then hit that subscribe button. Join our growing family of hearts drawn to warmth, not blood. This was the story of Eva Boone, but out here, there are so many more stories waiting by the fire.